Oh, it's live.
Right. Welcome to the Rapid Diffs front-end architecture discussion, I guess.
Yeah, welcome everyone.
Yeah, take it away, Stas. You have the first point. Let's start with that.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone has any additional thoughts about the proposed three-layer architecture for frontend. Maybe any downsides that we didn't discuss, or maybe someone has any alternatives, how we can implement that. Specifically, how we want to connect our existing view components with Diffs HTML. Also, we can touch briefly on testing, how we would like to test it. Should it be unit tests? Should it be integration tests? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I remember when you posted that. Thanks for bringing it up. I think that is definitely the start of this discussion. The only thing that I really like the separation that this would enforce. And from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this would allow us to, if you want to have a piece of code dedicated to just tracking actions by users and move that into instrumentation calls and all that stuff, we wouldn't have to go mingle with the other pieces of code. We would still be able to do that separately in its own module or plugin, what you described, because you then be able to hook onto events that you specify. Is that fair? Is that something that would be supported with this? That because that was my reading, like that sort of like loosely coupled approach.
It doesn't specifically mention how exactly like components will be communicating with the plugins and how plugins will be communicating with the diff file. But it can be possible, as you mentioned, using events. I'm not sure if events like is the best approach that we can take, because events are kind of hard to track down, especially if you don't have any support in DevTools. Since Vue has integration with the DevTools, maybe we can leverage that. I'm not sure, but we should consider events and also maybe some alternatives, because we've dealt with that in the past. Like I know a lot of people have painful memories from dealing with Bootstrap events. We don't want that in our implementation as well.
Got it. Thank you. There was one thing that we've talked in the past, me and Thomas, about specifying how we're going to be triggering state changes versus UI changes. I'm trying to think where like we need to prioritize, of course, UI changes so that it's like immediate and we don't have to, I don't have a delay there. Um, but we were wondering if we could create sort of a system where the state changes or wherever that lives would be going through some sort of like decoupled approach, more reactive in a way. Whichever that is, I don't really have any specific in mind, but the idea there is so that we can have more than one thing happening and we don't have to so that the emitter, the causer of the action doesn't need to understand exactly what are the implications of that action. We can keep building on top of that. But for the UI changes, we'll definitely be triggering that programmatically, like directly. Any thoughts there? And I'm sure Thomas would explain this a little bit better if he was here.
Yeah, we maybe need Thomas to elaborate on that. I think that's my third point here in agenda. Like composition API can help us deal with most of the pain points when it comes to state, because we stay in paradigm of reactivity. We don't rely so much on events that are coming from any point of our app, and it basically has better much better support in Vue ecosystem. And we also should clearly like state boundaries, which state we want to keep local, which state we want to keep global. That is definitely a big discussion, which belongs where.
Yeah, you didn't on that proposal. We didn't go deep. We didn't go to that level, right? Local global store state. Do we?
I think it's part of actually what I'm working on right now. So I'm figuring out which stuff we want to decouple from Vuex, and Vuex is a global state. Maybe in some instances we can keep some of the state as local, and we don't need a lot of like moving parts, moving data around like from store to our components. Maybe we just keep it local. But for other parts, we definitely need to find a way to handle global state, because there will definitely be global state, and how we want to communicate our components and the state, how is the data flow will look like. For so far, I see like just a better option of using composition API. Maybe others have some better alternatives.
Yeah, I remember when you brought that up. I think that made sense at the time. Definitely one of the concerns we have is like they're going to have a bunch of like things we want to keep using or reuse that already exist. So if we can use that to still support some of these things, I don't particularly have any opposition to that per se. So this could be a dumb question. Will we need to be using Vue 3 to be using the composition API, or will we be able to leverage that with Vue 2?
Good thing we migrated to Vue 2.7, which has
Okay.
composition API built in. So
Right.
I heard from Ilya that actually when we use it, it might cause some troubles when migrating to Vue 3. But I don't know the exact details, which cases as suspect to that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I wrote there, what you said, I think. Yeah, for that, I don't. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Can you give me an example of a Vuex component that we'd be reusing and not rewriting?
Discussions. Like discussions are heavily dependent on Vuex right now, and they get diff files through Vuex as well. And it's all deep linked. So discussions contain diff files and diff files contain discussions. So they're recursive. This makes things a little bit more complicated. But that's like the easiest case to imagine.
Okay, so but the discussions that have reference to diff files are only existing in merge requests, right? But they are existing in the overview tab as well, right?
Yeah.
Outside of the changes tab.
Yep. These are the same discussions. So we are sharing state with the nodes.
Right.
So that means we will eventually need to refactor Nodes app just a little bit for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how will those components walk me through how will those components get information from the diff lines, for example? Because diff lines, they will be coming through server-side rendered HTML, right? And how would be the extraction of information that we would do to, inject that into Vuex so that they have access to it?
That's a good question, and that's one of the unknowns that we have right now. So there are many ways we can do that, and that actually depends on the context. Like if you insert a suggestion in a discussion, we can actually fetch lines plain text with an external call. so we don't have to basically double our work and send plain text diffs with the rendered diffs. Or we can just, as I said, includes plain text diff file right in the HTML, which is not optimal, to say the least.
Yeah, I get that. That would
So
not be ideal.
since our interaction is now synchronous, we'll have to make it async and handle that async state.
Sorry, say that again.
When you go to a discussion right now and click insert suggestion button, like the interaction is instant, right?
Right.
With this approach, with an external request, it will be async, so there will be some kind of loading state, maybe. If we do it just like a simple implementation of that, we can go further, and like if user adds a discussion to a diff file, we already know that we need all the lines, so we just fetch them in the background, and once the user hits this button, they are already there. That's another way to approach this.
Yeah, the question is whether we can, at that moment, extract that information from the information we have server-side rendered, right? That is a big question. And can we do that performantly? Because I would definitely want to avoid downloading the same data twice if we could. The question is, how do we annotate the markup in a way that makes that easier to get that data extracted?
I'm not 100% sure that if we just get the text content of the line, it will exactly match the plain div, because there might be some slight differences. And I know that we have some extra processing on the backend when we render div files. Like so white space is handled just a little bit differently. I just don't remember what is.
Yeah, that is different.
So there might be some differences, and that might actually not work on the backend side because it needs exactly the same line in the suggestion.
Right. Then yes. Then we would do some asynchronous loading for that particular part. So the concern there is if it's a multiple line discussion, the suggestion would have to load the diff lines when the comment box is displayed, I guess, so that it's there when the suggestion is clicked.
Yeah.
Or, hovering the button or whatever. So that is work that would need to get done.
It's one of the most most challenging cases. Like other cases will be much simpler than that.
Yeah, I think from memory, I think that's the only bit that we need knowledge of the diff lines to do something in the comment box. The others are basically just to post. So to specify the location or where to post the comment on. Right. Maybe we should go back to the three-layer architecture and to see if there's anything that we would like to revise there. There was one thing that came to mind when reading it is the word plugins. I think it's a bit of a loaded word at GitLab, and we try to avoid that a little bit. Do you have any other proposals, or can we think about
Adapters,
alternatives?
like it's an adapter pattern. We can just call them adapters.
Yeah, I like that. And this is not necessarily of the architecture itself, is more like the wording of the concepts. Are you taking a note? Yeah. Good, thanks. Okay. Downsides for this approach, do we know already some of them, and where are they? Like, are you aware of some of the downsides of this approach?
Well, it's not a pattern that is used at GitLab, so a new pattern is always a
Yeah.
challenge. People will have to learn it and understand which stuff goes where. Like, should it be a plugin? Should it be a component? How do I connect this? Yeah, so educating people is definitely a challenge. Maybe complexity,
Mhm.
like writing new code will be not as straightforward as writing a new component, which you can just hook up into an existing component. So some additional work will be required. But all the downsides, I think it mostly depends on how we structure our data flow, like how data goes from an adapter to a component, how one component interacts with another component from another adapter. That is, I think, the crucial part here, and that will tell us main downsides of the approach. But I think complexity will always stay there. It's not as simple as adding a new component to an existing component.
Yeah, I'm okay with complexity as long as it's contained. So if you have the core is a little bit more complex, but then it allows you to write simpler components, I'm fine with that. What I'm struggling to understand though is once we get to, the components part, how will the components be affected by this? Because they will be a little bit more strictly interacting only through what props and events. Is that how you specify it?
That's the desired approach. Like, make sure if the stuff can be achieved via props and events, that's the preferred way. If it cannot be done that way, composition API can help with that. If you don't find a better alternative to that, provide inject, but that's for really, really specific cases.
I'm trying to wrap my head around all the details of this proposal live on the call. It's probably not the best, more productive way to go about this, but so diff wrapper, just so I understand, you'd have one diff wrapper per diff file, or would
Yeah.
that be the whole? Okay. Yeah, there's a part of me that I haven't seen fully tested is the performance of this. And of course, I think the performance of this is more dependent on the DOM manipulation, on how we choose to do the DOM manipulation more than anything else. It just that it would be up to the plugin or adapter to do that in a performant way, right? There's nothing enforcing a specific way of interacting with the DOM on the plugin side. That is it.
This approach gives us like full control over what we can do, since we are not bound to a like top level view instance. We can decide when to start a component, when to destroy it, how the data should be structured. Maybe we can even decouple most of our data calls from the components and move it somewhere else, like a data access layer. So this gives us lots of flexibility, and yeah, performance-wise, I think it should be able to deliver as good as performance as we can get.
Yeah, but it's up to the plugins to be performant. So what I'm saying, or the adapters. So what I'm saying is that that's another level of scrutiny and evaluation we need to have is like we need to make sure that the adapters are kept. I guess we have a couple of issues to track the performance of the application and all that stuff. So that would eventually be enforced by automated testing already.
Yeah.
That's probably a separate discussion than this three-layered approach. I feel like that is definitely a separate discussion on its own. Like how we'll be doing DOM manipulation in a way that it's performant and it's verifiably fast. and because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So at a certain point, we will be mounting the Vue apps we have available. But until then, the one thing that is coming to my mind is if we are server-side rendering the whole diff, the initial big challenge we'll have is, okay, now we need to update the DOM that was server-side rendered and we need to inject their discussion. Like how we do that performantly in a way that then gets still able to invoke methods from the original web component, for example, loading more lines in a way that all that still is performant. So that is something that I would like to see that we need to start working on very soon, I would say. And when I say working is not just a spike, it's actually just start implementing it. So from my understanding is like this 3-layered is a step above it. And we just need to know how we're going to be organizing the code so that then we can start implementing those bits, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so for your question in terms of the 3-layered approach, I don't think there's any particular red flag as we're discussing it. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the testing, what you had in mind, between those two options.
Well, when working with UX, I quickly discovered that testing UX in isolation is just pointless. Like if you decouple all the methods, getters, state, and start testing them without a complete integration, it falls apart very quickly. And I think with adapters and components, that's stuff that also can happen. So far for me, it makes sense to write only integration tests for the adapters. And components can be written with adapters mocked, so they don't have to use actual adapters. That's my general thought so far. But as we progress implementing this stuff, maybe that will change.
Got it. Yeah. I definitely feel like we will need to have how should I put it? Mind awareness that we want the testing to progress in a way that is sustainable, in a way that we don't start having tests that take for very long. So if we start off with just integration tests, I think that's by just part of that decision is like the tests will be slower than just running the unit tests. But in this case, I think what you said makes sense. But I'm definitely not a testing expert. I would like to have some other people looking at it. I mean, Natalia and Phil, if you have thoughts on that, definitely welcome to challenge what Stanislav just said. But for me, it made sense.
I'd like to add that actually the difference between unit and integration tests in performance terms is not really that big. So with unit tests, we just mock some modules and pretend they exist. And with integration tests, we just use the actual modules, which are not that really hard to bootstrap. The main challenge here is actually writing the tests. Like our adapters might need some additional mocks, and this could not be really easy to understand which stuff should be mocked, which stuff shouldn't be mocked, because with unit test it's clear, you mock everything, and with integration test it might be a slight challenge. It's just a matter of actually writing the tests and like the performance of the tests in our pipelines.
Just to add to what Stanislav said, I think around maybe 20% of what we count as unit tests currently are integration tests. You can see the component that is importing the function. The function is using access under the hood, but we're testing access on this component, which means we're already writing integration tests instead of mocking the method from the imported ones. And I don't think we had any huge performance issues. it's rather the problem with the test. It's not perfectly a unit one, but the performance is about the same. Yeah, like writing correct adapters will be the main problem. We have currently basically two working fine, Axios and Apollo, so everything else will probably require some work, but I can see the point of integration tests in this case.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification. That puts my mind at ease a little bit. Yeah, sounds good then to follow that approach for now, and then we can, as we go. Eventually what we need to be very good at is like documenting the patterns that as we go ahead and just find a way to make that clear for anybody looking at the code, how it's supposed to be done and how it's supposed to be worked with. So as long as we keep a strong documentation either on the file itself or some technical docs, I feel like that's acceptable, so to speak. Okay. Any other quite open questions about this architecture that you proposed? I'm not particularly sure if we made a decision about the events part, the reactive part. Do we have an outcome there?
Yeah, this architecture doesn't specify like the data flow. It just specifies areas of concerns. Like T-file web component just deals with the HTML and DOM. It doesn't do much else. Like adapters just connect existing components, maybe inter-component relations, and components just perform some user tasks. So this is only for the separation of concerns. As for data flow, yeah, it's still an open question. I don't know which one fits us better than others. Yeah, and we might want to spend a little bit more time on that because that will dictate a lot of things that we do right now with Diffs.
Yeah, I agree. And for that data flow, I'd rather have a day where we have Thomas present as well, just because we've had a lot of discussions on that, and he also would be useful to have in this conversation. There's definitely part of me that feels like I just want to get started writing code with this approach. The 3-layer approach, whatever, like with the adapters instead of plugins, name. I feel like we can start playing with it. We need to have further discussions about exactly that data flow. So because right now it's pretty agnostic and we can still like within the adapter still make some choices. It's free. The one thing, like the consequence of this for me is like, will we be allowing anybody to write new adapters, or will that be a code review responsibility exclusively? Have you thought about that? And if we allow others to write, what's stopping them from, messing up with the total performance of the application by writing it poorly? That's what I say.
Yeah, I think there'll always be a way to mess up, no matter how hard we try, or even if we limit who can write this code, who cannot. The main thing that is with this architecture is really hard to access stuff that is not in view. Like you would have to basically do lots of query selections, manual work. And as soon as you start doing that, it stops feeling view-like. You feel like you're doing something wrong. At this point, this architecture starts to work and you understand that you actually have to connect to an adapter. Adapter has to connect to a web component. And I don't think we should be limiting anyone from writing code on any of these layers. Because, for example, you want to add a specific feature to a div. It most definitely will require some changes to a web component because you will be making some DOM changes, like highlighting a part of the file, for example. diff file doesn't know how to do that yet. So we will have to implement that in the web component and then connect it with your component via an adapter. So it makes sense to allow everyone to add more functionality to the diff files web components and also write their own custom adapters.
I see. Yeah, that definitely that makes sense. I see the web components as like the primitives, right? Or what we can do, what we're able to do on the page,
Yeah.
or what changes we're able to enact on the page. So that's a given, right? But it would be easier for us to kind of like just direct them through documentation on that sort of thing. You said that they would be writing their own adapters. So they say, for example, that I want to put something like explain code. A feature like explain code would be select this text, display a little popover on that little DOM thing to trigger some action stuff. So what I'll be doing, I'll be updating the web component to allow that selection if it doesn't have yet, to do this popover thing. And then I'll write my own adapter to build that feature out, what happens when they click it, that sort of thing. If I need any UI, then I'll be using components hooked onto that adapter. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a fairly simple enough and agnostic enough approach to get started. And then we can, create some barriers, not barriers, create some boundaries on what we allow and what we don't allow. And I think for now, I'd want to, sit on this for a little day or two, for another day or two, before we commit to it. But after that, we need to move on to another discussion, which is like the DOM manipulation and data flow, or this data layer that you had, which is your second question. How long is this meeting?
I think we have like 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so for now, I think we can, unless Phil, I guess you're hearing this, but unless Phil has any thoughts on the 3-layer architecture, I think we can move on to the second point. Do you have any thoughts, Phil? Okay, he's reading, he's writing. I'll spend some time later today going through it fully. Got it. Thank you.
I'll just add the last point to that. I think one of the main challenges here will be actually finding a proper API for the web component, because we don't want to make APIs for specific use cases, like add a discussion element to a div, add a specific button to a div. We want it to be reusable as much as possible, and that can be a challenge. So I agree with you that we should start writing this code as soon as possible to figure out like the complexity of it, first of all, and the needs, like what exactly we need from this web component.
Got it. And I think we can solve that in terms of process in a way. If the web components is where we have the primitives, we can document it that any primitives being added to web components must be reviewed by the code owners. That's us. And have some guidelines on how to reach out to us before and all that stuff. It's like I'm thinking about the code quality consumers of merge requests, right? I want to add something to the getter. I want to add something that it's not there yet. You don't do that out of your own, a separate MR that doesn't even get reviewed by a code review. We need to collaborate there to make sure that it doesn't impact the low level part of the application. So we could solve that in some other way, not particularly code strictly enforcing that. But yes, thanks, Phil, for going that. That's why, I want to make sure that you and Thomas have time to actually go through what we just discussed. And Thomas is out today, holiday, but we'll also give him, the voice to just speak up at any particular concerns once he's back. Which moves us to the data access layer. Do you want to speak your mind, Stas? Since we have the recording, that way we can capture your concerns and your questions, and then we can potentially have a bit of a discussion.
We can discuss it a bit, but since Thomas introduced this topic, I think he should be on the call too, so we can properly discuss it. But as a general thought, I think it makes sense to have some form of access layer for data. And so far, it looks like it should be reactive, at least from my standpoint of view, because we have a lot of stuff written in Vue, and it would be a waste to just get rid of reactivity and implement our own custom solution for that. I also really curious, like what are the existing approaches to that? So for the data access layer, I would like to go with the most boring solutions that we can have, because introducing your own custom solution to that can lead to some unexpected problems that we have not dealt with yet. Like we tried Vuex, it's a pain. We don't want to go with our own version with Vuex and create even more pain. That's what I'm against. And also this directly relates to the data flow for the free layer architecture, because we don't have it yet, and the data access layer actually can be an answer to that question. How do we share the data between the components? Yeah, it's definitely worth discussing.
Got it. Yeah, I agree. We don't want to be we don't want to be holding a ball of like maintaining a library that we wrote just for this itself. So if there's anything there that we can use, great. And that's why I want to hear it from Thomas, because I one of the things that I've seen in the past is like we have many different ways of accessing data. And as we go further and we start experimenting, the data might be coming from different places, namely like local storage or IndexedDB, or the servers or some other potential places. So if we can simplify that by having a unified way to access that and make sure that that's responsible for getting that data. Sure. So I think I would lean on Thomas to give us sort of like a presentation on how he thinks that the data access layer should work, and we go from there. So maybe we can have this. So this meeting is happening every week, right?
Yep.
Okay, so maybe we could start the next call with that specifically. We might also maybe, if you have time, include this. Sorry, tomorrow is the morning call, so he won't be able to make it. I was going to propose doing that on the new Diffs call tomorrow, but that's out of his time zone.
Yeah.
So at the very latest, we should do that next week, if not earlier. That's what I'm thinking. I just want to keep moving this along as fast as we can, and waiting another week to hear about this is not ideal.
It seems to me like we should do some form of experiments with it, like try different kinds of architecture, how it fits with the server-side rendered approach. Maybe even scratch the free layer architecture, just try to implement it. Because I think
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the sooner we start writing code and understanding the needs of the components, which data they need exactly, that will help us understand better how the data should be organized, how the data flow should be.
Sure, I agree. Yeah, definitely. As you were speaking, a question arose, which is like, what are the challenges in open questions we have? Is will we be able to extract data from the server-side rendered DOM, essentially? And the question for me is like whether the data access layer could actually help solve this problem. Where, for example, when you're opening a comment box and you want to prepare the data for the suggestion, we could ask the data access layer, hey, give me the diffs for these lines from here to here, and you'll be responsible to extract that either from the DOM or from the server or wherever that is. But for the component consuming that, it would just be a direct question. So we can leave that open. The only thing I would say is let's come back to this with Thomas, whether later this week or next Monday. Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds good.
I'll talk to Thomas, have my one-on-one with him on Thursday. So, but maybe if we can have a call before next Monday, we should just to keep the ball rolling, because there's going to be a new milestone starting next Monday. If we can have issues to start on Monday with the outcome of this conclusions, it'll be helpful, because I again, like I said, we can't be in spike land forever. We need to start working on this and pushing code. So
my question is, do we have an issue specifically for the
data access layer?
Yeah,
I don't think we do.
I think we need one.
Yeah, I agree.
Because we can continue this discussion async. Maybe Thomas can help us in the issue itself.
Sure. He did already write some bits on the blueprint itself, which I think is slightly related.
I'll just assign it to Thomas because maybe he
Sure.
already has an issue in place.
Yeah.
If now, we need one.
I agree. Before we go, I know that we had other parts of the agenda, but I think we've addressed them in one way or another. I don't think there's anybody
we need to
opposing
discuss
composition.
composition API, but I would like Natalia to be on the call because she has much more experience with the downsides of misusing composition API.
Sure, but we already kind of like briefly discussed it, and I don't think there's
Yeah.
anybody that opposes like supporting that or just using that to support all other things. It's just if we need to figure out some details for sure, but so far I feel like that's a fair proposal, because we all know that there is going to be at least the Vuex context to support, Vuex components to support, and then whatever code base whatever solutions we implement on the other part. Which begs the question. One of the questions that I've kind of like been in the back of my mind for months is whether this code for the rapid diffs, where will it live? Like where will the front end code exist per se? So the question is like, is that part of GitLab project? Is it something that we're going to consider writing through GitLab UI, or at least just the components? To ideally we'll be able to bootstrap it wherever. But the question is like, do you have any thoughts on this? Is it just a done deal that it will be part of GitLab's project, or will we explore other avenues?
I think we should just host everything in rapid diffs folder in the front end.
And then how and then that gets brought into GitLab project as a dependency?
No, like directly in the GitLab project.
Oh,
Like,
sorry, that's a folder. Okay.
Yeah, just a folder
project
inside the front end folder. We
Okay,
might
and
want
then
to extract it at some point, but I don't see reason why we should do that now.
Okay. And there was a discussion before I left about having a way to, enable the rapid diffs mode. Do we get an outcome of those? I'm still catching up. I mean, we talked about having separate routes for the rapid diffs, and then Patrick, I think, suggested just using a query parameter.
I think Phil worked on one of those issues, like to add a new page for rapid diffs.
Okay.
Phil,
Okay.
do you have any context?
Feature flag and a query string to make it work.
Oh,
Yes.
that's nice.
That
Thanks,
works.
Phil.
That's great. Okay, so yeah, front-end rapid Diffs folder, I think to begin with, definitely feels like a good place to start. If you want to extract it later, we can and we should after a discussion about it, because we all understand the pros and cons. This is definitely something that is built for GitLab project. Although there is part of me that kind of like understands that some people in, the IDE world will definitely want to leverage the UI. It's not our top priority, but what I want to make sure that we have is the separation of concerns really well defined so that we don't have spaghetti code in the end after a couple of years of working. So GitLab UI would give us that, but they would also give us a lot more burden to, handle dependency updates and all that stuff. So there's definitely pros and cons there, but we don't have to make that call right now, I guess. So yeah, for now I think for now that's it. When you have some topics for future calls, what was the other one besides data access layer? It was something else.
It was data access layer and composition API.
Okay. So what I'll do is like next call data access layer. Okay, so we can bring that back in the next call. And I need, if you have a few minutes, there's part of me that I would need some explanation or expanding on what you mean by reactive notification based. Notification based, is that events based?
Yeah, events.
So that's something like maybe not that specifically, but event bus making changes to the data access
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's what me and Thomas discussed previously, is having a way of like decoupling state changes from UI changes in a way that it would be promoting a faster UI, but then eventually letting whoever needs to react to those state changes still do those state changes reactions. But it was at the time it was event based. So I guess, do you have a reason why it should be reactive? Because you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, if we go with like Vue reactivity, it has support in Vue DevTools. So you can track actually what exactly is going with your data at the moment. And with notification based, you either have to place debuggers all over the place, or just write your own custom integration with DevTools, which we are not going to do, I think.
Right.
If there's an existing solution, I'm really interested in looking into that.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. We need to have some way of tracking and like observe what's happening there. So reactivity, you're actually saying using Vue. Would that be Vue itself?
Since we already have Vue reactivity, it makes sense to reuse that.
But for example, how would that work if you want to have, the web component needs some data itself at that level? How would that work? Mount a Vue instance and access it through it?
No, we can actually, Vue provides some methods to inject your context into a function. I'm not sure if that's available for Vue 2.7. It's definitely available for Vue 3, but there are ways to do that. Like even running a new instance of a Vue app is not that costly if we just have one shared instance to get the state.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So who will create an issue for? Is that on you, Stas? Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we can have a discussion there, asynchronously and then asynchronous. an asynchronous discussion during the week, and then have a synchronous discussion next Monday.
Yep.
I feel like that could work out better than just having the whole discussion here. All right. I feel like that's the time for us. This is the time to make these calls. And again, a lot of these are two-way door decision. And as we go forward and we find bottlenecks and hurdles and stuff, we'll be here to handle those and find solutions for those. But for now, I feel like that's all we have time for, I guess. Anything else today? Cool. It's probably going to be other topics I want to raise, but I think these are the initial ones. One of the future ones will be DOM manipulation. Sorry, let me rewrite that. Performance DOM manipulation, which is a big worry that we have, is what are the things we need to take into account to make sure that the DOM manipulation of the web component stays extremely performant. So it's going to be a fun discussion. Cool. That's it. I'm going to be still catching up over the next day or two. But if there's anything that you think I should know, let me know. Drop me a message.
Sure.
Anything else, Stat? Do you want to close the call?
Yeah, I think we can close the call. Thanks everyone for coming. I think that was productive. Keep discussions in the issues and see you next week.
All right. Thank you. Bye.